What's up guys, Chigs here from Chigs Tech Reviews. So today it's Apple versus Apple Day. iPhone 13 Pro versus iPhone 14 Pro, and I'm bringing you a full head-to-head comparison video. And in this video we will be comparing the price, specs, features, cameras and lots more to find out what are the main differences between these two smartphones and is it worth upgrading. So let's start off with the price. The iPhone 13 Pro is actually no longer on sale in the Apple Store. The 14 Pro of course takes its place, but you can still pick this up in other retailers like Amazon, Argos, Currys, and the price has dropped down to around $949 for the 128 gig base model. And the new iPhone 14 Pro starts from $1099 for the 128 base model. So how do they feel in my hands? Well, they feel and look near identical with some very minor changes. So you've got the same matte finish, the same surgical grade stainless steel going all the way around, and the same ceramic glass on the front. Now the difference is the iPhone 14 Pro do come with larger sensors and the LED flash looks a bit different. And in terms of dimensions, thickness, 14 Pro is 7.85 millimeters thick versus 7.65 millimeters, and to be honest, again, not noticeable to the naked eye. They look exactly the same in thickness. And the weight, iPhone 13 Pro weighs 204 grams, 14 Pro weighs 208 grams. So the weight is in fact a few grams heavier than what Apple quotes on their website for both phones. The 14 Pro is slightly heavier, but there's not enough weight there or thickness to feel the difference. So in the hands, they feel exactly the same weight and exactly the same thickness. Now let's quickly compare all the ports. I am expecting exactly the same layout, but nevertheless, we have here a single loudspeaker, lightning port, microphone and antenna line, and exactly the same layout on the 14 Pro. Now on this side, we have another antenna line, power button and antenna line, and exactly same with the 14 Pro, antenna line, power button, antenna line. On the other side, we have antenna line, 5G nano SIM tray, and it also supports eSIM, volume rocker and mute switch, and another antenna line. Exactly same on 14 Pro, antenna line, nano 5G SIM card tray, volume rocker, mute switch, and another antenna line. And this is the UK model, and I believe EU and UK do get a SIM tray in their iPhone 14s. It's only the US model that doesn't get a SIM tray. And at the top of the phones, each one has a single antenna line and their second loudspeaker on the earpiece. Now if you look closely, and I will zoom in, the iPhone 13 Pro has a mesh grille on the earpiece, whereas the iPhone 14 Pro doesn't actually have that same mesh grille. You can see the iPhone 13 Pro's mesh grille does have a bit of dirt build-up, as that's been my daily driver for nearly a year now. But the iPhone 14 Pro doesn't have a mesh grille at all. So just something to point out. I'm not sure how that's going to affect the phone in the long run. Okay, so time to check out the displays, and let's state the obvious. The old notch on the 13 Pro versus the new smaller pill-shaped notch on the 14 Pro, which already on its own looks much better. But then Apple called it Dynamic Island and made it animate on certain actions, making the new notch look much more advanced and more desirable. In the short time that I've been testing the 14 Pro, I have to say I'm already in love with the animations. When you're playing music or even using a sat-nav, or even when you're on a phone call, the way that Apple implements Dynamic Island is amazing and very satisfying to use. So both phones have exactly the same screen tech. So the same 6.1-inch OLED S.Retina XDR displays with ProMotion adaptive 120Hz refresh. But the iPhone 14 Pro also has a really nice always-on display, which dims the display right down and activates 1 Hz refresh rate to save battery. It actually works really well. Now I know it took Apple quite a long time to bring AOD to its phones, but it works really well and it does not rinse the battery. So very pleased with the always-on display, and if for some reason you didn't want the always-on display, you can switch it right off from settings. But I'm really doubting that you will once you see how good it works. Now both phones support HDR, Dolby Vision and HLG, so that means if we open Netflix, you can see Dolby Vision is supported on both devices, which is really nice to see. Also, both phones have the same 460 ppi but the resolutions are slightly different. The 13 Pro has a resolution of 2532 by 1170 and the 14 Pro has a 2556 by 1179. Peak brightness is also different. So 1000 nits typical brightness on both indoor use. Then the 13 Pro supports up to 1200 nits peak HDR brightness versus 14 Pro's 1600 nits peak HDR brightness. But then the 14 Pro takes it a bit further. It will also give you an outdoor peak brightness of up to 2000 nits, which we have not seen in any iPhone before. So we have the same screen tech, but the 14 Pro will give you a slightly higher resolution, better looking notch, brighter overall display, and a very nice always on display to go with it, which I actually can't get enough of. Some other differences: both phones have a similar battery capacity. The 13 Pro has a 3095 mAh battery versus 3200 mAh in the 14 Pro. So the 14 Pro has an additional 105 mAh over the 13 Pro, and I think that is probably enough to cover the usage of the always on display. And that is why Apple is stating on their own website that you can expect the same battery performance in both phones. So around 20 hours video playback and 75 hours of audio on both. Now I will of course be testing the battery life in more detail in my upcoming full iPhone 14 Pro review once I get a bit more chance to play with it. Furthermore, both phones support 20-watt fast charging, so no chargers included in either box, but also both support 15-watt MagSafe charging and 7-watt regular wireless charging. Now both phones also feature stereo speakers with Dolby Atmos sound, and both speaker locations are in exactly the same place, one at the bottom and one on the earpiece. Okay, moving on, both phones are running the latest iOS 16 with all the new features running on both, apart from the always on display, which is only available on the 14 Pro. Now let's talk about the processing power. Both phones are of course powered by Apple. The 13 Pro has the A15 Bionic versus the new A16 Bionic. Both have 6 gigs of RAM, and I have both in 256 GB variants. Also, neither phone supports microSD expansion or headphone jacks. However, both phones do have a 5G nano SIM tray and also support eSIM. Alright, so let's check out the cameras. You can see both phones have triple cameras on the back. The 14 Pro has a 48 megapixel primary, 12 megapixel ultra wide, and a 12 megapixel telephoto. And the 13 Pro has 12 megapixel primary, 12 megapixel ultra wide, and 12 megapixel telephoto. And on the front we have 12 megapixel true depth sensors on both, located on their notches along with their Face ID sensors. So this is a quick camera comparison between the iPhone 13 Pro versus the iPhone 14 Pro. This is a microphone test. I'll be interchanging the audio from each other. Both phones are currently shooting 4K video at 60 FPS. Early in the morning I'm out, it's about 6 AM, morning walk. To me the video quality looks identical. It almost looks like I'm taking video from the same phone. So no difference in video quality. It is a dull day today. Quick stabilization test. I'm just going to run briefly, jogging. We're going to see what the stabilization is like on both phones. But on the iPhone 14 Pro I have switched on the action stabilization, the new mode. So hopefully it's going to be a lot smoother, and to test that we're going to quickly jog again. So jogging with both the iPhone 13 Pro and the iPhone 14 Pro, and we've got Pro Action mode active in the iPhone 14 Pro. That is it. Jogging over. So front facing video, 4K 60 on both. Yes, it's cold, so I've wrapped up warm. 6 AM in the morning, I think it's about 6 degrees Celsius right now. So here I am, out and about, to show you the differences, to see if it's actually worth upgrading. On the viewfinders, it looks like I'm using the same cameras. It's only when we switch to the photo mode and we check out the 48 megapixel photos, we're going to see a difference. But like, video quality looks the same. At least on the screens in front of me, they look the same. We'll see what happens during the editing stage. time to check out some photos. So in standard photo mode, both iPhones should be shooting 12 megapixel photos. But in actual fact, they are both shooting in 2268 by 4032 resolution, which calculates to 9.1 megapixels. So we are taking 9.1 megapixel photos in the standard photo mode on both iPhones. And it does not make a difference if you shoot in portrait or landscape. The resolution in standard photo mode is 4032 by 2268, which means 9.1 megapixel shots. Nevertheless, photos look very good on both, very similar results. There's not much between them. It almost feels like the same cameras. So now I'm actually comparing 9 megapixel photos versus 36 megapixel shots. That's right guys, iPhone 14 Pro shoots 36.5 megapixel photos in Pro RAW mode instead of 48 megapixels. And to prove this to you, here is a screenshot of both photo datas. From here you can see the iPhone 13 Pro is using the wide camera, which is the main camera, and you can see 9 megapixels, the resolution and image size. The same with the 14 Pro on the right, it shows the main camera, 36 megapixel, you can see the resolution and image size. In terms of photo quality, most of the time they look the same, but otherwise I'm actually preferring the results on the iPhone 13 Pro. There is not much between them otherwise, but do let me know which one you prefer. And I guess the real benefit of the 36 megapixel shots on the 14 Pro means you can crop in more without any loss of detail. Alright, so you guys have seen some camera samples and some videos. Let me know which one you preferred more. Did you find a big difference in quality between the 14 Pro and the 13 Pro? Let me know in the comments. Alright, now it's time to check out the benchmarks. And as you can see, Geekbench 5 CPU results. The 13 Pro has achieved 1737 single core and multi-core of 4812. The 14 Pro has achieved 1868 single core and multi-core of 5326. And if we compare the Geekbench 5 graphic test, you can see the 13 Pro has achieved a metal score of 14579 versus 15485. And quick look at the Antutu benchmark test version 9.1.1 on both, and you can see the results, 831K versus 942K. So interesting results from the benchmarks, and as expected, the 14 Pro does outperform the 13 Pro in every single benchmark test. And here is a quick look at my top performing smartphone chart of 2022, where you can compare the specs and prices of all the latest smartphones. And as you can see, the iPhone 14 Pro has ranked at position 13 on this chart with a benchmark score of 942K, and the iPhone 13 Pro is further down at position 23. Now you can view the full versions of all my charts online and free of charge at chigstech.com and read them at your leisure. Okay, time for some gaming. We are going to be comparing the COD graphics first of all. Both phones allow you to select very high and maximum frame rates. The option for Ultra is there on both, but if you select Ultra, it will drop the graphics down to medium. So for this gaming test, I'm going to set the graphics to very high and max. So that is the maximum graphics supported on both phones. So we are going to check out some COD gameplay, and I am going to be using my favorite iOS game controller, which is the Backbone. And the question some of you might have is, does the Backbone work with the new iPhone 14 Pro? Well, I'm about to show you that yes, it does fit. I know the sensors are slightly bigger, and you can see it's secure in place, and the controller does work as it should. So we're going to check out some gameplay, starting off with the 13 Pro using the Backbone game controller. Here we go.
Capture the objectives. Capturing Alpha. We lost the enemy. Enemy down! Tango down! Target inside! Recon standing by. Repeat, UAV recon is standing by. Enemy in sight! Keep on them. We're winning this one.
Alright. 14 Pro gaming test.
Alpha, we captured C. Enemy taking Bravo. Enemy down. Enemy contact. Target inside. Tango down. Enemy has Bravo. Tango down. Enemy down. We're capturing B. Lost the lead. Enemy down. sight. Sentry gun deployed. Losing Charlie. Recaptured A. Missile lost Charlie. Tango. Capturing C. Enemy contact. Contact with enemy. Contact with enemy. Tango down. Objective almost complete. Keep it up. Target's inside. Capture missile on standby. Losing A. Captured Sentry gun rating online.
So there you have it, guys. That was my quick comparison test between the iPhone 13 Pro versus the iPhone 14 Pro. So if you already have the 13 Pro, and by upgrading you get a faster phone, better looking interactive notch, always on display is pretty dope, and a slightly better camera for photos. Now hopefully this video has helped you see the main differences between these two phones. Also, do let me know, are you going to be upgrading to the iPhone 14 Pro? And if so, which phone are you upgrading from? Or do you have your eyes on something else? Do share your thoughts, hit the like button if you appreciate the efforts. Meanwhile, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you all have an amazing day. I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.